What is going on, everybody? Thank you guys so much for joining me. It is the Icebreaker here, back with another video. And for today's video, I figured I'd do something a little bit different for this one. And as you can see by the title of this video, I am going to be predicting one potential breakout player from every single NHL team this season. Some of these picks may be obvious while others will be more so off the board, but whatever. I'm going to explain all these picks for you guys. Without further ado, let's get right into the video. So going in alphabetical order here, first we got my potential breakout player for the Anaheim Ducks, and I'm going with Urho Vaakanainen. This is just simply based on the opportunity he's going to be getting entering this season. When you look at the Ducks blue line, they're pretty stacked on the right side with Jamie Drysdale and Kevin Shattenkirk, and then you obviously add John Klingberg. On the left side of that defense, outside of Cam Fowler, the depth is kind of lacking, so you could look at a guy like Urho Vaakanainen to maybe take on a top four role. And although I'm not necessarily predicting him to have a breakout offensive season, I just think, again, based on the role he's going to have, I just think you'd look at him as maybe being a more impactful player for a team like the Anaheim Ducks with playing in a top four role most likely. So I guess from that perspective, he can be considered more of a breakout candidate. For the Arizona Coyotes, my pick to have a breakout season has got to be Barrett Hayton. He's a 5th overall draft pick back in 2018. I just think with the direction the Coyotes are heading, a very young team with very little expectations entering this year, Barrett Hayton's a guy who's definitely going to have top 6 opportunities left and right throughout the course of the season. Could definitely see him maybe taking on a #1 center role and playing with some very talented, skilled wingers like Nick Schmaltz and Clayton Keller. So I just look at Barrett Hayton. I think he could have a little bit better of an offensive season. Obviously, last year, 60 games, he had 24 points. You know, it's not really great for a guy who was a high draft pick. I just think there's more offensive potential there, just untapped potential that he has yet to really come into form and be a perennial, elite player. Now, I don't know what his ceiling is, but I still believe that this year there's going to be a ton of opportunity for him to really pop off and just be more of an offensive force. Moving on to the Boston Bruins, my pick is Pavel Zacha. I just think the change of scenery is probably going to benefit him. He's going to be playing with some much more elite players. Although, New Jersey is definitely a team up and coming and do have some elite players on the rise. The Boston Bruins do have a plethora of pretty good, talented guys. I look at him, again, just getting the opportunity to play in a top 6 role with some of the injuries that Boston has, especially entering this season. I could very well see, maybe him having some chemistry within like an all-check line with David Pastrnak and David Krejci potentially as a second line there. Obviously with Krejci and Bergeron, the top 2 centers, he more likely than not to be playing on the wing. So I could see, a scenario where Loki kind of pops off. Could be a little bit of a hidden gem for the Boston Bruins team and improve their scoring depth. Can be someone who could put up about 25 goals, maybe 50 points. For the Buffalo Sabres, my breakout candidate is Peyton Krebs. I just think he's got a very high offensive ceiling. I think he's one of the more underrated young players in the league. He's coming off a relatively solid year, roughly half a point a game guy last season as his official rookie year. And I just think, obviously, there's a lot more offensive potential there. I could have gone with a lot of guys for Buffalo, like Owen Power and Dylan Cousins, let's say. But I'm going with Krebs. Maybe it's a little bit more off the board, but at the same time, it wouldn't overly shock me if he has kind of a low-key breakout offensive year. It could be someone that hovers around 50 to 60 points. Moving on to my pick for the Calgary Flames, I'm actually going to go with goaltender Dan Vladar here. I just think only being 25 years old, coming off a relatively decent year, but only playing in 23 games, I look at that Flames team, they're still going to be relatively solid. You can argue they're even better than they were last year. But, with Markstrom kind of over 30 now, getting a little bit older, I could see a scenario with Dan Vladar. Maybe the coach has more trust in him and maybe he gets a little bit more starts. And definitely if he can improve his game, be more of a .915 save percentage type of goalie, I could see him obviously kind of splitting the net a little bit more. Maybe not being like a 40-40 split, but maybe like a 50-30 split where Vladar gets about 30 games and just improves the goaltending depth on Calgary. And especially if Markstrom does have injury problems, Dan Vladar could definitely be a very solid option to step in that role. For the Carolina Hurricanes, this is a pretty obvious one for me. All signs are pointing to Jesperi Kotkaniemi having that breakout season, just basically on the fact that he's going to be in a much bigger role this upcoming season. When you lose a guy like Vincent Trocheck, that #2 center hole is now up for grabs. And a guy like Kotkaniemi really needs to step up and take that role from the throne and just be a much more impactful offensive player. And, he's going to have a lot more opportunity playing with some very quality wingers, especially when a guy like Max Pacioretty comes back. Maybe that's an option for him. Or also, obviously, they still have Seth Jarvis, Teuvo Teravainen, and Andrei Svechnikov. So a lot of opportunity for him to have a low-key breakout season. His best year, only his rookie season at 34 points. Couldn't really replicate that over his time in Montreal. And this past year, he was kind of being sheltered in the third line, even fourth line role, and not really getting much time at center. So definitely this upcoming season, he's going to have a massive, massive opportunity to break out. Not exactly sure like how big of a breakout year he could have, but obviously with the wingers he could have playing alongside him, is he maybe a 40, 45 point player? I guess that's a possibility. The Chicago Blackhawks, my breakout player is going to be Taylor Raddysh. I just really liked what he gave when he was traded from Tampa to Chicago. I thought in the games he played, he was fairly solid, and he definitely was more noticeable. I definitely think there is some untapped potential there, potentially. As well, the Blackhawks are not going to be a very good team, much like Arizona, so I could see a guy like him who's just going to be getting a more elevated role, definitely going to possibly playing a top 6 minutes. I could have named like Philip Kurashev, but I kind of more so expect him, in the top line role to have more of a breakout year. So Taylor Raddysh, just based off, he can maybe carry that momentum what he had to end last season into this season, can be someone who can low-key pop off and just be a bigger threat offensively. The Colorado Avalanche, my breakout candidate is Artturi Lehkonen. Just looking at what he did for them, to end the regular season, he was very solid and obviously stepped up hugely in the playoffs. Got 2 series winning goals in the Western Conference Final and obviously the Stanley Cup winning goal. And he's poised to be a perennial like top 6 forward on this group, with Andre Burakovsky especially deciding to sign with the Seattle Kraken. Artturi Lehkonen is going to get a ton of more ice time, going to be playing in a for sure top 6 role officially. And just looking at the players he has around him, he was more kind of sheltered in Montreal, being more of a defensive shutdown third line player. But with Colorado, if he is playing with guys like Nathan MacKinnon and Gabriel Landeskog, Mikko Rantanen, he is going to definitely produce a lot more offense. So, I don't even think this is really a hot take. I can legitimately see him being a 25-goal, 50-point player. For the Columbus Blue Jackets, I'm going with Adam Boqvist to have a much more impactful offensive year, even though last season was not bad by any means. 22 points in 52 games, especially for a defenseman. Definitely has a lot of goal scoring upside, as well as just overall an offensive upside. With that young Blue Jackets blue line around him, I think he is going to grow with it. But obviously, he's got a lot of talented offensive guys now on the Blue Jackets with Laine and Johnny Gaudreau. So I definitely think there's more potential for him to have a much more dominant offensive year. And I definitely think down the line, he is a perennial 40, maybe even a 50-point defenseman. For the Dallas Stars, I didn't really feel like there was a ton to choose from, but I did ultimately go with Thomas Harley just because he is one of their brighter young defensive prospects who's coming off a 34-game season where he had 4 points. I definitely think there's probably a little bit more offense in the tank, or just the fact, another year of his development, he's going to just play in a more elevated role, get more ice time, potentially can find himself in the top 4 as soon as this upcoming season. So from that perspective, kind of like Vaakanainen, just the opportunity and just him getting a more elevated role could be a reason for why he's more impactful player. So in that perspective, that's why he could potentially break out. For the Detroit Red Wings, my breakout player is Filip Zadina. Honestly, it's just because I think Red Wings fans are starting to get fed up with him. I think they really need to see this guy finally take the reins and prove to everyone that he was, rightfully so, a high draft pick in the 2018 draft, because he has really yet to really realize that true offensive potential. His best year statistically in terms of his points, his career high 24 points that he set last year, 10 goals. More likely than not, he's probably only going to be playing in a third line role, but just basically purely on the reason that he is still a very young player and he still has that upside. This is a time for him to definitely take that step forward and be a big reason why the Detroit Red Wings are going to be a much more competitive team. For the Edmonton Oilers, this is a pretty obvious pick. I'm going with Jesse Puljujarvi. This past year, 65 games, 36 points. Not bad by any means, but I definitely think that he's kind of been a little bit snake bitten. I really do believe that, he's a very big body, physical presence, and very solid defensively. But, he just lacks the finishing right now, kind of like Artturi Lehkonen, especially in Montreal. But for Puljujarvi, I think if with a little bit more luck on his side, I think he can find a way to be a more productive offensive player, especially with the talent around him in Edmonton. If he gets, a full-time top 6 role and play with guys like Connor McDavid and Leon Draisaitl, this is somebody who could underratedly have a 25 to 30 goal season, maybe 60 points. You know, in the right situation, I could definitely see that being a possibility. For the Florida Panthers, my breakout candidate is Spencer Knight. Last year was his official rookie season. He had a winning record in 32 games, 279 goals against, 908 save percentage. A lot of that would be catered to how he played much better in the second half of the season, because the first half of the year he really struggled, and he even had spent some time in the AHL as well. But I do think this next year, him still being a high draft pick with a ton of potential, I definitely think this is somebody who can low-key break out as soon as this season. And I just think he has the upside of being potentially a top 10 goalie in the NHL at the very least in the not-too-distant future. Especially with Sergei Bobrovsky getting a little bit older, I could see Spencer Knight maybe getting a little bit more starts and maybe pushing for that starter's role as soon as this season. For the Los Angeles Kings, my breakout player is Quinton Byfield, number 2 overall pick back in 2020. Still yet to really find himself and be a key offensive player, but you know, the 40 games, he had just 5 goals, 5 assists for 10 points. Just with the trajectory of where the Kings are at and where they're moving in the right direction, you know, they're definitely trending upwards. Obviously, it being the number 2 overall pick from a couple of years back, he definitely has that offensive potential to be an elite number 1 centerman. So as soon as next season, could be a very important year for him to just develop and become a much more noticeable offensive player. For the Minnesota Wild, not only is this an obvious one, I feel like I'm kind of cheating here, but Matt Boldy, just purely based on the fact that he was unbelievable in his rookie season and only played in 47 games, but 39 points. I just think the Wild team, they're such a young core. And even though they do have the cap issues, I think they're in the not too distant future with all their other amazing prospects coming up, they're going to be a contender for a very long time. And Matt Boldy, just entering his sophomore season, playing a full NHL season, I could really see him elevating his game offensively, especially with a guy like Kevin Fiala now no longer there. He's definitely going to get a lot more ice time and play much higher in the lineup. So I look at him potentially being someone who can score about 30 goals and maybe 65, 70 points as soon as this year. For the Montreal Canadiens, I didn't really think there was any other option for a potential breakout representative. So for them, it has to be Kirby Dach, former 3rd overall pick. I just think kind of like Pavel Zacha, I think the change of scenery is definitely going to benefit him. You know, just playing on a team like the Hawks, who are clearly just starting a rebuild, even though Montreal is going to be in a rebuild for the next couple of years as well, I definitely think they're much further ahead. They got a lot of very solid offensive pieces already. They're establishing a core, and I think Kirby Dach could be a big part of that if he can really realize his potential and be a very good number 2 centerman. Obviously, his best year is last season in terms of his points, 70 games, 26 points. A little bit disappointing for a number 3 overall pick. But obviously, you know, you look at the injury he had, the wrist injury in his second year kind of derailed his development a bit. I could definitely see that being a possibility. Maybe it was holding him back a bit. But, you know, coming into Montreal, it's looking like they're going to be a more offensive-minded team. You know, him playing for a guy like Marty St. Louis, there could be some reason to believe that a guy like Kirby Dach could have a pretty good offensive year. I'm not going to, you know, go too far ahead of myself and say he's going to be like a 60-point player, but, you know, can he be a 15-goal, maybe 40, 45-point player? For the Nashville Predators, I'm actually going to go with Dante Fabro, even though he's already a very solid top 4 defenseman. I think he's going to get a lot of people more notice about what he is as a true NHL defenseman. I just think he's still very young, and I definitely believe that there is some more offense there that we have yet to really see. This past season was technically his career high in points, 24 points in 66 games. The Nashville Predators are still looking like they're going to be a pretty solid team next season. They definitely got a lot deeper with adding guys like Nino Niederreiter, for example. So I think there's definitely some more upside for him to produce a little bit more offensively and just be a bigger key contributor in that regard, and can be a guy who maybe puts up 35 to 40 points. The New Jersey Devils, I'm not exactly sure if people are going to count this as a breakout player since, you know, the season I have him listed was his rookie year and he was very solid, but I'm going to say Mackenzie Blackwood, just purely off the fact that this New Jersey Devils core, I believe, is going to take a massive step forward. And I think their goaltending has to be a big reason why. And look at a guy like Mackenzie Blackwood, even though he's had some injury issues and he's been kind of gradually declining ever since his rookie year, I still think he has potential to be a very good for number 1 goaltender in the NHL. So I just think he's primed to have a very good season if he can be someone who could put up a 915, 920 save percentage and just be just a key contributor, really take the reins and finally, realize that potential as a full-time starting caliber NHL goalie. I could definitely see that happening. The New York Islanders, this is one where there wasn't a ton of options to choose from. They're more of a veteran team, but I just went with Oliver Wahlstrom. I just think he has the goal scoring upside. I definitely think he's going to be playing a much more elevated role as soon as this season. This past year, 73 games, 13 goals, 24 points. I would consider that a little bit disappointing. I definitely think the offense is there, but still very young. But I could definitely see, entering this season, he could be a big reason why the Islanders have a bounce back year. And I can legitimately see him be a guy that could produce roughly 25 goals and say 40, 45, maybe 50 points even. For the New York Rangers, maybe sort of an off-the-board pick, because I know a lot of people will be thinking like Kaapo Kakko or Alexis Lafreniere, but I'm going with K'Andre Miller. I already feel like he is a very solid, reliable top four defenseman. Just so young, has a huge body. 20 points, played all 82 games. I definitely think there's more of an offensive ceiling there for K'Andre Miller, and I just think he's going to continue to develop and be a big reason why that Rangers blue line is definitely going to be a lot better than it was, this past season. I already view Miller as a very well-established, very solid top four defenseman. But I do think, again, the offense, I think there's more there for him to give. And especially with the Rangers players around him, just the elite offensive guys that he has to play with, I definitely think there is a possibility that, as soon as this season can take another step forward offensively, be more of a, maybe even a 40-point player. I don't know if that's, a huge ask, but we'll see. For the Ottawa Senators, this is more of an obvious pick as well, but I'm going with Matthew Joseph. Obviously, as soon as he was acquired by the Senators from the Tampa Bay Lightning, he showed exactly what he has offensively. He had a lot more to give. He was over a point per game in that short stint to end the season with the Sens. And I think as soon as next season, that Senators team is looking to take another step forward, especially offensively. And a guy like Matthew Joseph is definitely going to be a big part of that. Now, right now, I do believe he's going to be slotted in on the third line. But, just based off the potential that he showed to end last season, is he a guy that in that role, can he be a 45 to 50 point player? Honestly, that would not surprise me in the slightest. For the Philadelphia Flyers, my pick is Joel Farabee to have a big breakout season. His best year was 2020-2021, where he had 38 points and 20 goals in 55 games. Last season, he had a little bit of a step back, but I just think he has the potential to be a perennial 25 to 30 goal scorer. I really do see 30 goal potential, and as soon as next season, I do believe he can be a guy to put up about 30 goals and 55 points. I think that's where I had him projected anyway. For the Pittsburgh Penguins, my pick to break out is Ty Smith. I think change of scenery is definitely going to benefit him. Coming from New Jersey, he had a really good rookie season, 23 points in 48 games. Definitely struggled a lot more. His offense did kind of take a slight step back, but defensively, he just was absolutely atrocious. So I think with the Penguins team, he has a lot of elite offensive players that really are going to help him, kind of bounce back and just be a more productive all-around defenseman. But I definitely think his offense has potential to take another massive step forward. And I just think he's going to be playing a lot more minutes, playing in a top four role, probably in a second pair with Jeff Petrie. I don't know how that would work because they're both more offensively minded defensemen. But I still think Ty Smith, all the signs are pointing to him being that, that breakout young star for the Penguins and just be a more productive guy on the blue line. For the San Jose Sharks, my breakout player is Kaapo Kähkönen, the goaltender who was acquired from the Minnesota Wild late last season, and he definitely played a lot better with the Sharks. So it could be one of those things where you can just carry that solid play into next season and really take the reins and be that legit starting caliber goaltender for the San Jose Sharks. Obviously, James Reimer, Aiden Hill are both pretty decent. Reimer did have a good season, but Kaapo Kähkönen is still very young. I definitely do believe he has that potential to be a really solid starting goaltender. So I think as soon as next season, he could be a very solid brick wall there and just be, one of the reasons why the Sharks aren't as bad as people think maybe. For the Seattle Kraken, it was a little bit of a tougher one as well because they're more so of a veteran team despite only entering their second NHL season. But I went with Vince Dunn. I definitely think, even though coming off a really solid 35-point season in 73 games, he is that main offensive piece on that blue line. And I really do see him having that 50+ point potential and being one of the better offensive defensemen in the league. So I definitely think, the Seattle Kraken are definitely a lot deeper offensively, and I expect them to be much better than they were last season. And a guy like Vince Dunn can be a massive reason why they take that step forward. Moving on to the St. Louis Blues, this was maybe the toughest team to pick a breakout star for, because I feel like a lot of their younger guys, they kind of had their breakout seasons last year. Obviously, Robert Thomas and Jordan Kyrou, just to name a couple, but I went with Logan Brown only because he is still pretty young. And although I'm not exactly sure if he has an elite offensive ceiling, I definitely think he's probably, in a change of scenery coming from the Ottawa Senators not too long ago, there probably is some more potential for him to be a more dominant offensive player, especially with the Blues. They're such a deep offensive team. And especially I look at a guy, losing David Perron, a lot of that offense they got to make up for it. A guy like Logan Brown could probably replace it. So I don't know. I'm not exactly sure if he's going to pop off, but, maybe a 45 point player is somewhat of a breakout season for a guy like Logan Brown. For the Tampa Bay Lightning, I just think it makes all the sense in the world for Mikhail Sergachev to be that breakout player for that team. Still a very young defenseman. I think even though he's had some very solid offensive seasons, his best being his rookie season actually with 40 points in 79 games, I just think there's a lot of offensive upside for this guy. And obviously the Tampa Bay Lightning see that. They gave him a massive extension, paying him like $8 million. I think that contract's going to kick in at the start of next year. This season is this season and next year is 2022-2024. But anyway, Mikhail Sergachev, top 4 defenseman already. And, just a lot of guys are probably leaving. And, they locked up Chernak and himself. So I think he's going to have a much more elevated role for years to come. And I really legitimately see perennial 50 to 60 point potential with Mikhail Sergachev. I really think he has that offensive ceiling. For the Toronto Maple Leafs, my breakout player is Timothy Liljegren. I just look at that blue line, and I think it is more of a veteran blue line. There's some certain guys on that team that are getting a little bit older. And also there could be some guys there like being, trade bait like Justin Hall or Jake Muzzin, who's on, 35 years old right now. And I look at a guy like Timothy Liljegren, who's coming off a really solid year. 23 points in 61 games. I just think he's going to have a much more elevated role, play in all situations. And I definitely envision him having a breakout season, especially with the elite offensive team that the Toronto Maple Leafs are. He could be a massive part of that and just really improve that blue line. And, they need someone else other than Morgan Rielly to kind of, carry the puck and be more offensive. And I look at Timothy Liljegren as potentially being that, sneaky player. For the Vancouver Canucks, this is an obvious pick. Vasily Podkolzin, I definitely legitimately believe he has 25-30 goal potential. His rookie year, 26 points in 79 games. Not necessarily great, but, only for a rookie, it's pretty decent, I would say, at the same time. I definitely think that Vancouver Canucks team overall is still very young, and I think they're only going to get better. And especially their offense, I think is going to be a lot deeper. And a guy like Vasily Podkolzin, if he has that amazing breakout sophomore year, the Canucks are going to be a lot more lethal than people think. For the Vegas Golden Knights, my breakout candidate is going to be Nicholas Hague. Already a top 4 defenseman. I believe he is playing on the top pair with Alex Pietrangelo last time I checked. And he's only 23 years old. His best offensive season in the NHL, 17 points in 52 games. But I looked at this guy's numbers, and he's been considered a very solid offensive player at every league he's played in. Even when you look at the OHL, I believe he even had a 35-goal season as a defenseman. And he had a lot of great offensive numbers in the American Hockey League as well. So I can see a guy like Nicholas Hague with that aging blue line can be a guy that maybe steps up into a more offensive role. Obviously, still keeping the two-way game, just, improving his all-around game as a whole. But I can legitimately see him, maybe doubling his point totals, being roughly a 10-goal, 35-point player. For the Washington Capitals, my breakout player is actually going to be Anthony Mantha. Even though he's among the older guys on this list, he's already 26 years old or maybe even 27. But I just think when healthy, there's definitely a lot more offense there. His best season statistically, 48 points is technically his career high, although he's had other years in Detroit where he had higher point per game. But 48 points is technically his career high in 67 games, 25 goals, 23 assists in 2018-2019. And I just think, especially with some of the injuries that the Washington Capitals have to start the year, no Tom Wilson, no Nick Backstrom, if Anthony Mantha gets a top-line opportunity and plays with Alex Ovechkin and Evgeny Kuznetsov, that could be someone who can low-key pop off and be a really underrated offensive force. I really do envision him fully healthy to be a 30-35 goal player. and maybe a 70-point guy as well. I just think the offense, he still has yet to really, take that elite step, because I definitely do see that potential with him. He's been in the league for a while, but I still believe there is more offense than he's shown. But he obviously has to stay healthy. But, just with an elevated role here with the Capitals, he's definitely someone to keep an eye on. And for the Winnipeg Jets, my breakout player is Logan Stanley. He's more of a shelter defenseman. He was mainly playing on the third pair last season with Winnipeg, but, still very young. Another year in his development, I can see him maybe cracking a top 4 role, or just overall getting more ice time, playing in all situations. With the new coaching staff, you have Rick Bowness now as the head coach. If Logan Stanley impresses him and takes that step forward, he can really be relied upon in all situations, and Rick Bowness maybe takes a liking to him. And although I don't necessarily see him having the greatest of offensive upsides, I just think overall he's going to be a more impactful player on that Jets blue line. With that, that is going to wrap up this video of me picking one potential breakout player for every single NHL team entering the NHL 2022-2023 season. Be sure to let me know in the comments section what players you agree with and disagree with on this list, and give me some of your own potential breakout players for your favorite teams. However you'd like to be engaged in the comments section, entirely up to you. I allow all of it. It's not a problem to me. And if you got questions, I am the type of guy to answer them, so don't be shy. Anyway, thank you guys so much for watching this video. It was a lot of fun to do, and I will talk to you in the next one. I'll see you guys later.